continuing a series that we started a couple of weeks ago. We've simply called it 21 Days. And basically what we did was we said we want to take 3 weeks and we want to kind of dedicate ourselves. Here at the beginning of the year, we're going to go into a time of prayer and we're going to prepare for what God has in store for us. We've got lots of plans. We've been working on lots of things. We've been telling you about some changes and things that are happening. And we just wanted to say, God, we're going to start there and we're going to spend some time of prayer. And so we started week number 1 doing that. Ask you to pray along with us. And we talked about prayer in the sense that it is something that gives us a spiritual sight, right? It gives us a spiritual perspective on things. When we pray, we look at things differently. It causes me not just to think about people, but when I'm praying for somebody, when I pray for my neighbor, when I pray for a friend, when I pray for somebody, it invests me in them. It gives me spiritual perspective. But the other thing we're allowed to do in prayer is we're allowed to remind God of the things that He promised us, right? People in the Bible did it lots of times. Moses does it. David does it. Nehemiah does it. God, you promised. God, you said. Not that God needs that reminder from us, but it gives us that ability to say, God, we know that you want this. You have promised this, and we pray your kingdom come. So we spent week number 1 talking about prayer. Last week, we talked about the idea of community, of togetherness. That's so significant, so important for us that we have that. We all need it. We were created for that. We were created to need and to have and experience community. And so we talked about how one of the simplest and easiest ways to do that is just that we get together and that we need to socialize. We need to eat together with some people. But that's the basic level. There's a deeper level to that, and that's when we grow together. And we do this best within our groups. We certainly want our groups and classes to eat together. But when we open the Bible together, we begin to share what God is doing in our lives, and we begin to share how God is working in what we talked about and how we're applying that, then we begin to grow together. And that's a good thing, but even deeper than that is when we give together, when we serve together, when we have people around us. There's something that causes within us. We begin to grow together. Some of you have experienced that when you worked on a project together, when you got together and helped somebody, when you raised some money together. God drew your group together. It was like an unintended consequence. You helped somebody else, but in the meantime, your group kind of formed a greater and deeper community. But as good as all of those are, maybe the deepest and maybe the most difficult one is when we go through hard times together. If you've been a part of a friendship or a group of people where someone had a tragedy, a crisis, went through some kind of very difficult time, you know that draws the group together. You're praying for one another. You're connecting and asking one another how you're doing. And so there's something about that. We need that. The encouragement that I left with last week is that it is that group that you need to work on before the crisis comes. Those are hard to kind of shortcut those relationships. You need community before the crisis happens. You need it built in so that when you get to the crisis, you've got those people. So we've talked about prayer. We've talked about community. Today, I want to spend a little time talking just simply about serving. There's a couple I just want to applaud for just a minute. Paul and Mickey Prince, are you in here right now? Paul and Mickey just did a great job this last week of serving. There they are back there. Just wave at them real quick. Mickey has been helping us put together our perspectives class that met just last Monday night for the first time. We've been telling you about it for a few weeks and telling you about, I told you I was going to take the class, and it just kind of helps us understand what God is doing in the world. What are His purposes in this world? Monday night, because of their hard work and a lot of other people, We had over 70 people show up for this class. You remember what Monday night was like. I mean, it was snowy. There's still stuff on the streets, and it's cold, 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 like 5 degrees. Had like 70-something people here. Like 30 plus of you from our church were a part of that, and a lot of it goes back to just the hard work that they've put in and the invitations that they've made, and I appreciate you guys serving in that capacity, serving our church, serving the kingdom in that capacity, and thank you guys for those of you that are participating in that. Here's what we know about serving, because we just talked about it last week. Serving puts you on a team. It gives you some people. It increases your community. There's just something fun about when a group of people get together and do something. And like our worship team, there's some camaraderie that takes place there. And there is that same kind of community that takes place back in some of our kids' areas. People working together week after week, and you can't help that. It just allows that. But serving also does something else that maybe you've not thought of before. When you've thought of serving, you've thought about the good that you could do with somebody else. And maybe you've thought about the enjoyment and the personal benefit, the pleasure that you might receive of being involved in helping somebody else. But something that I think we often overlook is that serving increases your faith. It grows you. It causes you to be a stronger Christian. And maybe you've never thought of it that way before. Maybe you've never thought of that benefit from your serving. Because this is what happens. I talk to people who are mature Christians, people who have been around for a while. And the question that I'll ask them is, when did you grow in your faith? What are some of the things? And sometimes I'll get answers like, well, when I really got involved and started studying the Bible, or when I got some good friends that kind of helped me. But here's what I hear often, and it goes something like this. Someone asked me to help serve in an area. Somebody asked me to do something. Somebody asked me to help with something. Or sometimes I felt this draw. I felt this internal urging to do something, to accomplish something, to fix something, to get involved. And usually people would follow it up with something like this. I didn't feel prepared to do that. I didn't feel equipped to do that. But in the process, I felt like God was moving me. And they were nervous and they were scared and they were uncertain, but they saw God do something amazing. And that tension that you feel when you're in that place right there, wrestling with God over something, when He's bringing something to mind, when He's putting something before you, that issue right there is this wrestling match that is not just the benefit that God may use you for something or God may use you for someone that's outside your comfort zone, but it's also that He's going to do something inside of you. He's going to build your faith. And so I think God is inviting all of us to do something that's outside our skill set, outside our experience, for you to serve and for you to do something. And that tension that you experience of, I don't want to do that, but I feel like God is wanting me to do that, that's a faith issue. It's a faith process. God stretching that faith muscle for you. Matthew chapter 14, our text today, gives us an example of that. If you haven't turned there yet, open your Bible, Matthew chapter 14. We're going to see that with Jesus and His disciples. In fact, for His disciples, following Jesus was a constant adventure. I mean, it was always something that's going on. They were always trying to keep up with things, and that's the case here. This is a familiar story. You're going to know it. In fact, we're going to lump two stories together. Jesus feeds a multitude of people, 5,000. You know that story. And Jesus is going to walk on water. What do we learn from that about how we serve God and serve people around us? Well, let's start Matthew chapter 14, verse 13. It says, when Jesus heard what had happened, He withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. well, what just happened that would make Jesus want to be by himself? Well, it tells us in the verses before that his cousin John the Baptist had been brutally executed. He had been beheaded by Herod. This was, just an odd thing that happened, and a terrible thing that happened, and a brutal thing that happened. And Jesus says, I need to be by myself. We understand that. We absolutely get him wanting to do that. And so he pulls away, and it says then, hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw such a large crowd, he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. So Jesus is trying to get away from people because of a loss, but people are still following him, and when he gets off the boat, here's all these people, and they have all these needs. And Jesus feels for them. He has compassion, but as we've talked about, compassion isn't just feeling bad. Compassion is then doing something about it. And so Jesus then begins to heal the sick, begins to respond to them. And so Jesus is here with all of these people, and he's healing them. He's probably using opportunities to teach. And so verse 15 goes on. It says, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. So apparently there's some responsible parties in the 12 disciples, some that are thinking ahead, some that are concerned about people's welfare, and they're like, hey, Jesus, we need to kind of dismiss here because it's going to get late, it's going to get dark, people need to go find some food, and so how about we do that? And it says in verse 16, Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. They don't need to go away. You feed them. So there's a good response here, right? Jesus, we need to let these people go so they can, find some food. It's getting late. It's getting dark. And Jesus says, no, we're not going to send them away. Here's what I want instead. I want you to feed them. And you can imagine, they're like, Jesus, we can't do that. We don't have the ability to be able to do that. Which is much the response that we have, the tension that we feel when there's a need, when there's a ministry, when there's something to do. You have this need, you hear this opportunity, and people are asking, can you help? Can you do this? Can you lead this? Can you be a part of this? And you think, well, I probably need to do something. And maybe you even sense God saying, I want you to do something. I want you to meet that need. But internally, you fight it and you say, no, God, I pray for people. I don't do it. I pray for that stuff to happen. Because when you think of you in that environment, you think about what you don't know. You think about how untrained you are. You think about how people are going to ask you hard questions and you're not going to be certain about how to answer those questions. And so you sense God saying, I want you to be involved. I want you to do something. That's where the disciples are. Jesus, we need to do something about this. And Jesus says, yeah, I want you to feed them. So verse 17, here's their response. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So apparently they've already kind of looked to see what their resources are. The Gospel of John tells us that it was a boy's lunch, that his mom had packed a lunch for him. Nobody else had done that. And so all they have is this little boy's lunch. It's all we have. Like, Jesus, we can't do this. This is all we got. We're not trained for this. We can't do it. It's more than we have. It's more than we can possibly take care of. This is a bigger need than what we can possibly provide for. So verse 18. Bring them, that's the resources they have, the 5 loaves of bread, the 2 fish. Bring them here to me, he said. Bring them here. Jesus says, okay, bring to me what you do have. I know you don't have much, but bring to me what you have. This is what he says to all of us, right? Okay, I know you don't have much, but bring me what you have. You might be saying, well, yeah, I'd really like to be involved, but I don't know much about the Bible. Okay, Bring me what you know, Jesus would say. Well, I don't have much time. We're really busy. And Jesus would say, okay, bring me what time you do have. All right, Jesus, I don't have any experience in this area. Okay, bring me the experience that you have. I'm old. I'm disabled. I don't have much energy. Oh, okay. Jesus' response would be, bring me the energy that you have. Bring me what you have. That's his message to the disciples. Okay, you don't have what it takes to feed this crowd, but bring me what you do have, and we will figure it out. Verse 19, that's exactly what happens. Verse 19, he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, and he broke the loaves. So what Jesus is doing is a miracle, right? He looks up to heaven, he gives thanks to the Father, he's going to break this meal, and he is ultimately going to feed thousands and thousands of people. We're not talking about a group of whatever's in here, a couple hundred people. We're not talking about that. We're not talking, about a handful. We're talking thousands of people here, and Jesus is going to break this into pieces that they can eat. Notice right here, verse 19, Jesus does something that only he could do. There's nobody else that could do that. None of the disciples could do this. None of the listeners there. There's nobody on the face of the earth, and certainly nobody that was there at that time, that could do what Jesus did right here. He performed a miracle. But the story's not over, because the rest of verse 19, after he does that, after he breaks the loaves, it says, then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples did what? They gave them to the people. Did the disciples have a job? Absolutely. Jesus handed it to them after he'd done the miracle, and he said, okay, now you hand them out to the people. Once Jesus handed them the bread and the fish, they did what they knew how to do. Oh, we can do this now. And they took their little trays or their little baskets or whatever they had, and they began to hand out food, because that's all they could do. They couldn't do anything else, but they could do that. They didn't know how to provide for 5,000 people, but they could turn around and serve it to the 5,000 people. And that's exactly what they did. They did what they knew how to do, and they trusted Jesus to do what only Jesus could do. So when you have that urge to do something, you feel like you need to meet a need, your responsibility is simply to do what you know how to do, and to trust God to do what only He can do. And that tension you feel, is your faith being stretched? Is God growing your faith? God enlarging your faith? It's God working on you. It's God growing you. That's an incredible miracle, isn't it? And the disciples are a part of it, but they didn't cause it. In fact, look what happens in verse 20. Verse 20, they all ate and were satisfied. In other words, they ate as much as they could. It says, then the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who were there was about 5,000 men. And then Matthew tells us that's not even counting all the women and the children. I mean, we're thousands and thousands of people here. Maybe 15,000, maybe 20,000 people. We have no idea how many people are here, but there's an incredible miracle that takes place. And isn't it interesting that Jesus not only feeds everybody, but there's leftovers. Like, there's stuff for people to take home and go, wow, I can't believe this. Not only did He feed everybody, but He did it so abundantly that there were more than we needed. Now, here's what we see in this. The disciples, they didn't go into the fast food business. They didn't, open up a food truck somewhere and go, hey, we're awesome at this. We ought to start something. We could do a franchise. We can make this happen. They didn't do that because they knew this wasn't about them. They understood we only did what we could do. This was about Jesus and what he could do, and we trusted him to what he could do. And if you've ever served in that capacity, you've known it wasn't about me. It wasn't about what I could do. I only did what I could do, and I let Jesus do all that he could do. He did all the rest. And so what Jesus is doing, and this whole story is about his disciples trusting him. He's involving them, he's including them in the ministry, but they're trusting him now to do what only he could do. Now, that's not the end of the story. In fact, you may not even know that the story goes on into another story, which you've likely heard, and maybe you've just never put them together. But verse 22 tells us that Jesus dismisses the crowd, sends them home. They're full. They can go back and do their thing. Then he tells his disciples, hey, you guys get in the boat that we were in, and you go back to the other side. And Jesus, what I originally started, I need some time alone, and so I'm going to do that. And he leaves his disciples, and they get in the boat, and they're headed back. And verse 24 tells us this, that the boat was already a considerable distance from land. So it's been a while. They're out maybe in the middle of the lake, and the boat is being buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them. Wait a minute, they're out on a boat, they're out in the middle of the lake. Jesus walks out to them, walking on the lake, it says. So here's Jesus walking on the water. This is right after we had this experience with Jesus feeding the 5,000, had this incredible thing. So now we've got miracle number 1, the feeding of the 5,000. Now we've got miracle number 2 of Jesus walking on water. And look what happens when his disciples see him. Verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. Certainly, we all would be. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. We'd all been nervous if we saw somebody. What's going on? I can't believe that. And Jesus calms them down. Jesus speaks to them, tells them not to be afraid. It's me. Verse 28. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. We tend to think of Peter and his personality as a little bit impetuous, right? He's the kind of guy that acts and the kind of guy that talks before he really thinks it through, right? That might describe you. If it does, somebody's already looking next to you and going, that describes you, right? Okay, that some personalities are like that. I don't think that's the case here. I think what's going on is Peter is doing the same thing he did when he turned and he served the food. I think that's what's taking place right here is Peter understood the previous lesson. The lesson earlier in the day, whenever Jesus asks me to do something that I'm incapable of doing, or whenever he invites me to do something that's out of my comfort zone, or whenever he invites me to do something that doesn't make any sense, or whenever he invites me to do something where I might embarrass myself, or whenever he invites me to do something that is bigger than my ability, if I will simply do what I know how to do, then Jesus will come along and do what only he can do. And so Peter says, Lord, invite me. Tell me to come to you. In verse 29, come, he said. Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Isn't that amazing that in that short sentence, we cover actually now a third miracle, somebody else, Peter in fact, walking on the water. Peter says, invite me, tell me to come to you. And it says Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water. And it's kind of nonchalant right there, but that's a big deal, isn't it? There's somebody who is all human who is now walking on the water. And all Peter is doing is the same thing that he did when he turned and served the food. Peter doesn't know how to walk on water. He doesn't know how to do that. But does he know how to get out of the boat? Absolutely. He's done it 1,000,000 times. He's a fisherman. He knows how to get out of the boat. And he knows how to walk. He's been doing that since he was a year and a half, something like that. So he knows how to get out of the boat. He knows how to walk. And he does those things, and then he lets Jesus do what only Jesus can do. That's really what the Christian experience is all about, isn't it? Of you and I doing what we can do and letting God do what only He can do. It's trusting God to do the unimaginable. And so what if we all prayed like Peter? Lord, just invite me. Tell me to come to you. Lord, invite me out of my comfort zone. Lord, invite me to do something different. Lord, invite me to go on an adventure to you. Lord, I want you to use me in the lives of other people. And I don't want it to be my idea, and I don't want it to be something that I know I can do. I want the assurance that you're inviting me, and that I'm going to do what I know how to do, and I'm going to then let you do what you can do, and only you can do. And here's the thing, some of you, God's already inviting. In fact, some of us are going to have the conversation after this service. You're like, how did you know? Did my wife tell you something about what's going on? You were preaching that to me today. No, I'm just preaching from Matthew 14. That's just the way that God works. Some of you, He is already inviting. And for some of you, it may mean getting out of your comfort zone and doing something like talking about Jesus with somebody else. For some of you, it may mean that you take a step and say, I'm going to lead a group. I've been a part of a group. I'm going to lead a group. For some of you, it may mean volunteering in our children's ministry or in our student ministry areas. And there's something that's drawing you. There's something that you feel. You know there's something you need to respond to this, but you keep coming back to things like this. No, I'm not cool enough to do that. Or no, I'm not trained enough to do that. Or no, I don't know enough to be able to do that. What if somebody asks me a hard question? What if we get into a predicament? I don't know how to respond. I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to answer it. But God's inviting you. And that tension you're feeling right now, that tension is stretching that muscle for you. Can I do what I know how to do and let God do what only He can do? So verse 30 says, when he, Peter, saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. So what happened? Peter's walking on the water, and all of a sudden now he's sinking in the water. What happened? Well, it's simply this. Peter got reminded of what he couldn't do, right? That's all it is. Peter gets reminded, you can't walk on water. This is impossible for you to do this. You can't do this. He gets reminded of what he couldn't do. So verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Here's how Jesus ties this all together, these two stories that we just read. This is the tail end of it. He says, this is all about faith. Jesus is clear, right? He throws out the word. He says, this is about faith. This is all about faith. This is what we're talking about. And so Jesus is saying, this is all about you guys trusting me for what you cannot do. Quit trusting yourself. Quit depending upon yourself and depend upon me. Now, I don't think Jesus is chastising Peter right here as much as he's saying, Peter, you were almost there. You were so close. Just let me do it. Quit thinking about what you can't do. Let me do it. I mean, Peter's the only one that got out of the boat, right? I don't think Jesus is mad at him. Jesus is simply, we were almost there together. So end of the story, verse 32. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. There's another miracle, right? Fourth miracle. The wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Man, that had been an amazing experience for them. And can you imagine the stories that they told after this day and night? They get back to the shore, they get back to their families, they get back to the co-workers, colleagues around them, people within the town. Can you imagine? You're not going to believe what happened to us while we were gone. You're not going to believe this. I mean, there were thousands of people, and we didn't have anything to eat. We told Jesus, send them home. Jesus said, nope, you do something. We found this little boy's lunch. Jesus turned it into a banquet for thousands and thousands of people. And we helped. We served it. Not only we served it, we came back. There was leftovers. Look here, I've got leftovers from that. Can you believe what happened? And you're not going to believe this. On our way back is what happened. We're on the boat by ourselves. Jesus shows up. He's walking on the water. Peter, that idiot, he said, Jesus, invite me. And he came out. Peter's walking on the water. Peter about drowns. And Jesus raises him up. The wind's that. Can you imagine the stories that they had because of what happened? They did what they could do. Jesus did what only he could do. And those stories keep going on. You know what? You're here today at a church where some people stepped out of the boat. Right? 40-something years ago, some people said, you know what? We're gonna do something, and we know we can't do it on our own, but we can do a part of that. And they gave what they could give, and they did what they could do, and they watched God do something. And you guys are enjoying something. You're participating in something because a handful of people got out of the boat. Let God do what he could do. We've got some people meeting right now at a campus in Coweta. And there were a handful of people from our church that said, you know what, we need to do something over there. And they stepped out of the boat. They got out of the comfort of things that they had grown accustomed to here. They stepped out of the boat and they helped launch a campus. And they didn't know what they were doing. And they would tell you that. We didn't know what we were doing. None of us knew what we were doing when we launched that campus. In fact, there were people that were like, you guys are crazy. What are you doing? There's people coming to know Jesus, and their families are involved, and kids are coming, and it's because some people did what they could do. Some of you dropped your kids off over in the Ridge Kids area or over in the early childhood area, and you're like, oh, thank the Lord, this is good. We needed a break from our kids. We needed some time away. They can learn their stuff, and we can go and kind of concentrate and learn our stuff. But you need to understand that there are some people caring for your kids right now who understood this. God was inviting them to something, and they're like, I feel like I need to help in that area. And they didn't want to. And what if that 3-year-old asked me a Bible story that I never knew that Bible story? And they had all kinds of reasons why they couldn't, but they did what they could do, and they let God do the rest. And if you love participating in our worship time today, and man, the songs are great and the music's good, and I just felt like I was in the throne room of God, and you got to know there's some people up here that at one point stepped out of the boat and felt like God was saying, use your gift, use your talent. And they had all kinds of excuses. No, I'm not good enough, and I don't get up in front of people, and I don't help. And God kept calling him, and they go, God, I'm just going to do what I can do, and I'm going to let you do all the rest. If you're one of those recipients, where God at some point included you, and he asked you, and you did what you could do, and you let God do what only he could do, then you know the thrill of that, the adventure of that. But for some of you, let me just ask it this way. What is it that God is urging you to do? What is it that God is nudging you to do, that he's putting on your mind? You're coming up with all kinds of reasons why, and you're praying that somebody else is going to fill the gap, but you're not going to do it. What is it he's wanting you to do? See, I think this is everyone's story that has grown in their faith. And it may be the missing part of your story. In fact, maybe you would say that you're stuck in your growth and in your relationship with Jesus. Maybe you would go on to say, I'm wondering if God still works and God still moves and if God still does anything and if I still have any faith at all. And you still come to church and you still are involved in a group and maybe you still read your Bible and you do all those things, but you're like, I don't know, what is it? I don't feel like I'm growing. And maybe this is the part that you're missing right here. And the question is, will you do what you can do and trust God to do what only He can do? And if you do that, you will learn to trust God in a whole new way. But if you don't, you might never know what God might have done through you. You would miss out on all of that. When you serve others, when you trust God and let Him do what only He can do, you're going to benefit from that. And you'll see the benefit of that. Now, others, they're going to benefit. And we tend to concentrate, I want to do something for other people. But when you trust God to do what only He can do, when God is at work, then you see Him show up and fill in that gap for you, then your confidence in Him will grow. So maybe today as we've talked about that, maybe there's something that God is urging you to do, or maybe you just know God is urging you to do something and you don't know what it is. And we provide an opportunity at Ridge Christian to participate in something we call Serve Tour. In fact, there's a place on your handout today where you can actually go. You can look online. There's a QR code there. You can go to that and go, I don't know what it is, but how can I do something where I'm being stretched, where I'm being led on an adventure like this? Coming up February 18th, all that information there. You just sign up and you show up and you see some different opportunities for you to serve. I believe that when you do that, God will grow you like you maybe never thought He would. Pray with me. Father, thank you for teaching us today through this incredible story and stories of you at work in this world. And we're grateful, Father, for just the reminder that there's a point where we step out of the boat. There's a point where we turn around and serve. But we recognize that it's the point of us doing what we can do, and recognizing that there is something far beyond that only you can do. And so, Father, we trust you. We depend upon you to do that. Would you lead us? Would you point us in the direction? Would you show us where we can meet those needs? It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.